all these long straps, they're all the same width. So you can just use a strap cutter and cut a ton of those out, and then just use like an end punch or something to get that shape. That way you can just make a bunch of straps and punch a ton of these parts out. Make it go a lot faster if you're looking to make a bunch of these to sell. But just cut them just outside the line and tape them down to your leather. So what I like to do is punch the holes that are marked first, and either make sure you're using a small hole punch. This is a 0.8 millimeter, or a stitching chisel. It'll just look a little cleaner. If you go too big with the hole punch, the holes will look weird and the thread's just going through these massive holes. Then I'll mark those holes on the back. Make sure you're cutting away from these points that are on the inside. And with curved spots like this, it helps to keep your middle finger down, tip the knife up further, and just kind of walk it. And I'd rather be outside of the line a hair than inside, because you can always trim or sand that section off. Another thing you can do around tight corners especially, and if the leather's real thick, this can come in handy, is don't try to go through all the layers all at once. Just have the knife tipped up and just go a comfortable depth where you can still get that curve nice and sharp, and then come back and finish that up. And you can peel that off once you go all the way around too, so you can really see where you're cutting. And even though I ran it through my burnisher, I'll still bring my finger down to the table, slide it up to this corner. I like to hit this edge just a little bit more. I find it just kind of helps that burnish look a little better. So if you have a little bit of discrepancy, some bumps you want to get rid of, you can sand them off. And I'll go back and forth across it like this, but then go with it a little bit. And sometimes you'll get some frays that'll pop up from the back. So I'll just do a swipe from there and then kind of at an angle come up so it pinches them around that corner and cleans out that all up. Obviously you want to try to get your cuts as clean as possible first, and then just touch it up if you have to. We'll go over these two different styles, one sewn and one strictly riveted. And one thing I will mention too is all these straight parts, so if you get rid of them curved ones, all these straight parts are the same width. So you can cut these out with a strap cutter and just rip a bunch of strap and then use like an end punch or something to tap these ends out. They don't have to be the exact shape that they are, as long as the holes are in the right spot. That way you can speed this process up and pump more of these out, and that's the other reason I made a strictly riveted one, because all these straight ones can be punched out real fast, and you can rivet these together pretty quick if you're looking to sell a few. So we'll start with the sewn version here. You want the buckle to come up off the bigger curve, since the potion bottle is going to sit in this like a dish. So if you just have it coming down towards you like that, and this will slide up right like that. And I'll just start in this next hole here. If you don't consistently follow the same side of the thread every time you go back through a hole, the stitches will misalign and bop back and forth and look sloppy. Make sure your stitches are tight. You don't want to overly tighten them. While we're going across this single layer of leather, if you overly tighten your thread, it's going to change that distance. That measurement's going to tighten up and it won't fit quite as nicely. So pull them tight enough so they look good, but that's it. And when we come around here, we're going to backstitch across that, so that's going to reinforce all this buckle. Continue here, stop right before you get to those marked holes, because we're going to start adding these parts as well. So we got up to this first reinforcement strap here, and you can see one side the holes are further apart than the other. That's for the big side here. And obviously it won't line up if you're doing the wrong side anyhow. Just keep going straight across these. If you get the hole lined up, then you don't have to twist your wrists. You can throw these into a stitching pony or something. It can help speed up the process if you have both your hands to use. Stop one hole short of the end here, and that's where you're going to bend this around, start going through here. So that will form the bottom. And you can come across here, tie a little knot, and stuff it down in behind here if you want. Or you can come across and then back stitch back across again. Really up to you. I usually tie knots and stuff them in between layers. So I went over that end so everything was doubled up, but then I came through in between those two layers. I'll tie a little knot, add just a tiny dab of glue to make sure nothing comes undone. Stuff those ends down in there. Now for the second row of stitches here, I like to just start in the back this time and work my way around. You just work your way around. Make sure that marked hole, you're hitting it right on the end of the hole of these reinforcement pieces here, because they can twist on you. If you need to tap it with a mallet, just to flatten it out a little bit, don't go too hard, but you can give it a couple taps. We're going to start in the back, since more of these stitches on the front are going to be showing. That way any of the back stitches and all that will be hidden. But what I like to do first, just to make it easier so you're not fighting all these layers, is this top row of stitches. You'll notice there's 3. We're going to go through to hold. We're going to go through these top holes to hold that strap down so we're not fighting it while we're trying to sew everything together. And what I like to do is go around the edges on here too. I just like how it holds everything together a little bit better. So I just go around that edge and then I'll come around this edge. You don't have to do this step, but now with that held there, you're not fighting trying to hold it down. And you can just put this in here. And when you come back up through these layers, you just get this other side in here. You may need to kind of wiggle these parts in there, kind of push them up in there a little bit, and pull these stitches a little bit tighter than you usually would, just to make sure that gets in there. Once we get to these marked holes here, these straps are going to come across. And keep in mind, with this, there's 4 holes. So if you don't have each one's marked, once you get to the front here, gotta get this on. You can backstitch if you want. I usually don't. If I have trouble hitting the hole, I'll come from the front just to open it up. That way I don't have to twist my arms around every single time trying to find the hole there. The last row of stitches here, just make sure when you start you're hitting each one of the holes. You don't want to miss the hole on this main part here. You'll notice if you fit this on here, it's going to be a little tight on some of the spots, and that way as it gets used and stretches a little, it'll have a nice fit. It won't overly stretch and be loose in there. But what I like to do is before I dyed and I seal this leather, before I cut anything out, that way after I cut it out I can burnish the edges, but I don't seal the back side. That way once this is completed I can take some acrylic resin and this will help shape it and seal it and lock it into that shape. Don't want to go too overboard here. And just seal the back side of all this stuff. You can hit the edges too. It can be good to keep a paper towel or something handy. So if it starts to get drippy, you want to try to get rid of that right away. So I notice it's starting to drip. I'll get rid of that excess quick. And just from manipulating it and stuff, the front can be sealed again, and it'll get into all these little nooks and crannies in between stitches. Hit all the edges. I just pick one part at a time to get rid of the excess. And you can do it how I was just doing it if you only want to do the back side, just be real careful, but I usually like to go on the fronts as well, get it in between stitches and everything. You can also use a sponge like this, just get it just a little bit wet so you can blot off the excess. You can feel that it starts to kind of want to hold that shape. It's got the moisture in there, but before this starts to dry too much, make sure you get all the parts here. And you slide this in. It can be just a little bit sticky. Don't pull this overboard. Let it sit in a nice, comfortable position here. And there's a little bit of forming that you can do. Get it to how you want it. And then just let it sit, and when it dries it'll be much more likely to hold that shape for a lot longer. And down the road, a couple years, you can reseal it if you want. One of the few versions where you can actually have it on your belt, flip it out and pull it through. A lot of the other ones you have to take your belt off and slide it off your belt. So this is the riveted version. This one can be made a lot quicker. And again, all these strap parts are from the same width. So you could just run your strap cutter, cut a bunch of straps, lay the pattern down, punch it out, make these a lot quicker. I do the process just a little bit different with this one. I like to put these little reinforcement straps on. We'll put this on. That's going to be just on one side. And we'll get this one ready too. Put the buckle on it, put this on one side. Makes it a little bit easier. But when you're punching these holes out, make sure they're the correct size for the rivets you're going to be using before you start punching the holes. So if you're going to use a domed side of this, it's not as big a deal. If you're going to go flat, which I sometimes do, so the back of these are a little flatter, I make sure the main stem part is coming from the back so that when I flatten the back of that out, it's not going to affect the way the head of this thing grabs that. You can see there's two different sizes of those little reinforcement pieces. Smaller one goes on top. Now we'll set that piece aside and get this one ready. So this will be the buckle here. If you need to skive the back of that a little bit to get the rivet to be long enough, go for it. And what I did is only that back rivet's going through all the layers. So we can actually just get this situated here, this top hole. And if you don't want to mess your table up, throw a piece of leather behind here. Now this can be tricky if you just grab it and throw it on there. You think, oh, okay, that's right. But that's not right, because the wider part is going up so that it can sit in there like a dish. So if it helps to hold it like this, even put the bottle in there, it'll be going this way. So it'll go down like this. When you're doing these rivets, you'll feel it going down a little bit with each hit, and then when it gets down and it's not going a little more, maybe one more tap to really lock that in there. This one will move around a little bit more when it's completed, but when the bottle's in there, it holds everything nice and straight. So now it becomes tricky. So what I'll do is flip this around to the dome side and set it from the inside of the part instead. And if you want, you can flip this tool over and use the flat side if you want to flatten the back of this a little more. Now those can come out and even pop around that rivet, and it's not a big deal. It's going to sit on there just fine. So what I usually do, pop them off right away, and then just finish this off. And you can open it up a little bit. That way you know it's tight and it's kind of just out of the way. And what you can do if you really want those together is put a couple tiny little holes and put one stitch right there and tie it in a knot to hold it. But that's not gonna affect the quality of this at all, so I just leave it as is. And it forms like I did with the other one when you spray the inside or use a wool dauber and you seal it and put it on there, everything kind of locks in shape. This is going to go in between that layer. Like so. I'm going to get it to that first hole. And attach that first. And you can put a little dab of glue right there if you want. And maybe I will. And again, you can skive that back of that strap if you need to a little. Just don't go too thin, because this is what the weight is going to be pulling on. Since I put glue on there, I'm just going to make sure it's nice and straight, so when that glue dries, I'll be good. And then this one just helps the strap, so it doesn't have as much pressure pulling on right here. Just two more. You may need to straighten these out a little bit. Make sure you're using a decent rivet. If you use super cheap ones, there's a good chance they're going to start popping out on you. You know, this one didn't have enough length to it, and that one popped out. So I'll probably just go back with a longer one first here. It's the same thing as before. Just seal everything up. And I usually start with the strap.